r/nosleep. Posted by you/helpcreepylandlady. My landlady is acting really creepy and I don't know what to do. Please help. Part 1. So I'm currently locked in my room and I don't know what to do. I'll give you all some background before I dive right into what's been happening. So I'm currently living in, let's say, a large city in the UK. I've just moved here to study and rent is super expensive, so I decided to rent a room from a landlady. She's Chinese, she's really kind, and there are 3 other tenants living in the house. So far, it's been pretty ideal. She works long hours so she's barely here and the house is always very quiet, which is the perfect atmosphere for studying. The only major drawback is that I have to ask her permission before I have people over and we can't have house parties, but I'm a mature student so I don't really care about that. I've been living here for about 4 months now and everything has been absolutely fine. So fast forward to tonight. The weather where I live has been pretty stormy recently. It's past midnight, I can hear the wind howling, and there's a downpour going on outside. About 3 hours ago, I suddenly remembered that my boyfriend was going to be coming over next week. I went to knock on my landlady's door and ask for permission, but no one answered and I saw no light under the door. I decided to text her saying, "Hello, landlady's name. Sorry to bother you. I was just wondering whether it would be alright for my boyfriend to come over next Tuesday and stay overnight until Wednesday?" After a couple of minutes, she replied with, "Of course. No problem." It suddenly dawned on me that it was already 9 p.m. and my landlady was normally back from work by 7 p.m. at the latest. She drives out of the city for work and, with the inclement weather conditions, I became quite worried about her. I texted her again saying, "Thank you. Are you alright? Is there a lot of traffic because of the rain?" I didn't get a response immediately, so I went back to doing my reading for my classes next week. About an hour later, at approximately 10 p.m., I finally got a response. It had been so long that the sound of my phone really startled me. This is where it starts to get weird. The message from my landlady read, "Don't worry. I am fine. I was in an accident and now I'm dead." Understandably this freaked me out. But English isn't my landlady's first language and she's made worse spelling mistakes before, so I wasn't too concerned. The wind, however, was getting louder and the rain more fierce. I was really concerned that she might be hurt and even contemplated calling the police. I replied immediately saying, "I'm so sorry to hear that. Was it a bad accident? Where are you? Are you staying in a hotel tonight?" This time, she replied very quickly and the message read, "No, tonight I sleep next to you." Again, this struck me as quite strange, but our rooms are next door to one another, so I thought that might be what she meant. That being said, her English wasn't normally this bad. I decided I would leave it and go back to doing my reading. Within about 10 minutes, my phone went off again and there was another message. It was in Chinese, so it took a lot of wrangling with Google to finally decipher it, but this is what I think it says. When I wrote it into Google Translate, the translation came back saying, "I'm so hungry." I assumed that she had meant to send this text to one of her Chinese friends but had sent it to me by accident. Perhaps she was out in the cold and wet, waiting for a recovery van for her broken down car, complaining to her friend that she wanted to go home and eat dinner. It all still seemed relatively innocuous, so I decided to write back saying, "Sorry, landlady's name, I don't really understand what that means. Did you mean to send that to another friend? Are you alright?" At that point, she tried calling me, but for some reason the thought of answering that call sent chills down my spine. After all, the whistle of the wind, the oppressive dark outside my window, the crash of raindrops against the glass, it was all quite creepy. Not to mention the weird way in which she'd been speaking. Eventually the call rang off, but it was immediately followed by a message which read, "My name." After more fumbling with Google Translate, I discovered this meant "You make me very angry." The presence of my name at the start of the message assured me that this time it was definitely intended for me, even though my landlady knows I can't read or speak Chinese. My landlady is a really sweet and docile older lady, so I was quite surprised that she would say something so openly aggressive. I just sent her a quick message saying, "I'm sorry if I've upset you. I hope you make it home safely." She didn't respond and, feeling a tad shook up, I eventually went back to my reading. After a while, I calmed down and realized it was probably all a mix-up. I did, however, become more concerned that my landlady still hadn't shown up. So, just before midnight, when I heard the familiar creak of the front gate, I was actually quite relieved. I nearly poked my head out of the door to greet my landlady, but decided that might be a bit weird. I heard the key in the lock, the slam of the door, the footsteps slowly creeping up the stairs. But what I heard next made my blood run cold. My landlady stood directly outside my bedroom door and began whispering something that sounded like, "My name, whoa how my name, whoa how," occasionally getting louder and more frantic, then reverting back to the calm but persistent whisper. I could hear her fingernails scratching slowly but purposefully on the wood. I immediately ran to the door and locked it. I've never been more thankful to have a bedroom door with an individual lock. As soon as she heard the lock go, she let out this horrifying wail and started beating on the door. I was genuinely so terrified that I just curled up on my bed and sat paralyzed, staring at the door. After what felt like a century, she stopped banging and I haven't heard from her since. I've managed to gain my composure, but I haven't contacted anyone yet. What should I do? Should I leave my room? Should I contact the police? I want to leave the room, but I'm afraid she might be out there. It's past midnight now and I don't know what to do. Please help. So this post is a follow-up to my previous one about my landlady acting strange. Needless to say, the situation has only gotten creepier. The night I wrote the message, I had been working pretty much non-stop all day on assignments. Even though what happened with my landlady had utterly freaked me out, I ended up lying down on the bed and pretty much passed out not long after writing my posts. I was so exhausted that I didn't even turn out the light. Honestly, I'm amazed I was able to sleep for so long. The next morning I woke up feeling pretty groggy and I got up to make coffee. It was so out of it that I didn't remember what had happened until I went to open the door and realized it was locked. I must have been feeling brave, because I opened the door and went downstairs. I noticed my landlady's door was closed and the coast was clear, so I went and made coffee as normal. I figured maybe I'd dreamt the whole thing, or at the very least that it hadn't been as bad as I remembered. I made coffee, got ready for class, and left the house on Friday morning. As I walked out, I noticed that my landlady's car wasn't parked outside, so I assumed she had gone to work as normal that morning and I felt relieved. I was totally freaking wrong. I came back from classes at around 5 p.m., went out to get some groceries, then came back to do some more work in my room. At about 7 p.m. I was just flat out overcome with hunger, so I got up to make dinner. As I opened my door, I looked straight at my landlady's door and immediately stopped in my tracks. Her door was open, just a crack, and she was stood in the opening just staring at me. All of the lights in her room were off and her face was obscured by the darkness, but I could tell there was something wrong. I know this sounds insane, but it looked as though her lips and nose were missing. Like the bottom half of her face was just one huge cleft palate, with red open flesh marked by the whiteness of her bare teeth. She kept alternately eyeing me and the threshold to my room. She was breathing heavily and making these grotesque guttural sounds, as if she was choking on water. My room was fully lit but, without the hall light on, it was actually quite dark in the hallway. I had my mobile phone in hand but that was it. Without even thinking, I just made a break for it. Blood rushed to my head and my heart was pounding. I could hear her door open, could feel the vibrations as she literally thundered after me down the hall. When I made it to the bottom of the stairs, I noticed that her heavy footsteps had stopped. She must have stopped at the top of the stairs. The downstairs hallway light was on, and I feel like this may be somehow connected. Either way, I didn't dare to look back. I shot out of that house and just kept running until I made it to the nearest cafe. I was barefoot, I had no money, and my mobile was rapidly running out of battery. Fortunately I was able to get through to my boyfriend, who I'd already spoken to about the situation. He came to pick me up and I stayed over at his house Friday night. I'm using his laptop to write this post out as we speak. After I got back to his, I was feeling so shook up that I could barely move, but eventually he calmed me down and convinced me to call the police. I also contacted my other housemates, but one of them is currently back home in New Zealand, one of them still hasn't responded, and one of them didn't really understand what I was saying. English isn't his first language. When I mentioned my landlady's name to the police, I noticed a sudden change in the dispatcher's tone. She told me to wait and that they would be back in touch, but I didn't hear from them again until today. This is where it starts to get really strange. So another police officer, this time a man, called me back and asked me to confirm my landlady's name and her address. He paused for a long time, and then finally he told me that the woman I'd encountered in my house couldn't possibly have been my landlady. My landlady was killed in a hit-and-run accident on Thursday night. I was dumbstruck. I asked them why the police hadn't contacted me, but it turns out all of us have been living in the house illegally. We'd been paying her cash in hand, so I had my suspicions, and they had no idea there was anyone else living in the house. Apparently they were able to identify her based on her name badge, which she was wearing at the time of the accident. However, as despicable as this sounds, the police officer told me that her corpse had been robbed before they'd found it. Her mobile phone, wallet, keys, everything but the clothes on her back had been taken. He said it was highly possible that whoever had her mobile phone was the one sending those text messages to mess with me, and they probably used the ID in her wallet to figure out her address before coming to rob the house. At first this sort of made sense, but then I told him about how the messages were in Chinese. How would some random thief know how to write fluent Chinese? The police officer's only answer to that was they'd done it the same way I had, by using a translator. I then broached the subject of the creepy whispering and how disfigured the person that had chased me looked. He said he believed it might be a homeless person, potentially injured and suffering from a mental illness, but then I asked how a homeless person could possibly get from the scene of the crime to our address, over 30 minutes drive away, in such a short space of time? It all just doesn't add up. If you were going to rob a corpse, why would you then go to their house and stay there overnight? And why harass people connected to the victim? I asked him if anyone else had come forward in connection to my landlady and he told me I was the first. After a lengthy discussion, he told me he wanted to meet me in person to try and get some information about next of kin, but first he was going to send some officers to our address. He told me to sit tight at my boyfriend's house, where I am now, and wait until he called me back. I've informed my university to let them know and they've given me some leeway with regards to assignments and classes this week. I think this definitely counts as extenuating circumstances. All of this happened at around 5 p.m. today and I was starting to feel much better about the situation. I was going to write this up tomorrow and head to bed, but I just received this text message from my landlady. I think I've managed to type it into Google Translate correctly, but all it says is thank you for asking me to eat? I don't get why she's still talking about food. Is there something I'm missing here? Maybe she is some homeless person who's stolen my landlady's phone and is trying to trick me. But why does she keep using Chinese? What should I do? Should I respond to the message, or phone the police and let them know?